Welcome to Bishop Sheridan Presents on the Catholic Radio Network. Bishop Sheridan Presents is a weekly roundtable discussion of events and issues facing the church and culture today. Bishop Sheridan Presents is a production of the Diocese of Colorado Springs and the Catholic Radio Network. And now, here's your host, Bishop Michael Sheridan of the Diocese of Colorado Springs.
Welcome to this episode of Bishop Sheridan Presents. I'm your guest host, Veronica Ambuel, assistant editor of the Colorado Catholic Herald newspaper. And with me today is Cynthia Cerny. She's the author of a new book titled Waiting for a Name. This book has been endorsed by Archbishop Samuel Aquila of Denver and our own Father Paul Wicker, who's the pastor of Holy Apostles Parish. So welcome to the show today, Cynthia.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, before we delve into specifically your book, can you tell us a little bit about your faith journey? I know you have a very interesting story. You grew up as an ice skater at the World Arena, correct?
That's correct. I guess you could say I've been skating on thin ice most of my life. But actually, it was an upbringing that I took for granted. And by that, I mean, I had everything pretty much that money could not afford. So I came from a two-parent household. I didn't even know what divorce meant. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. We were very close to my grandparents and all of that. And skating was a very privileged life. And I learned many, many things through skating about life. For instance, life isn't always fair. We have differences as people, but our similarities trump all of those differences. So it also gave me an opportunity to have experiences that most kids won't have, in that I was a performer, I met many celebrities, and just very privileged, very fortunate.
That's very interesting. And I believe you told me at one point that you started skating when you were only 2 years old. Is that correct?
That's correct. It spanned, my skating career spanned 19 years. Got my first pair of ice skates at age 2. Was my first ice show at age 3. So,
wow, that's impressive. Now, tell us a little bit about your faith journey and what your relationship with Christ was growing up. I know you mentioned that you pretty much attended Divine Redeemer Parish during your entire childhood. Is that correct?
That's correct. You use an interesting word in your question, and that is relationship. And that was missing for me. I didn't have a relationship. I had a faith. I was a Catholic, but I didn't ever truly connect with God. So I learned a lot of prayers. My parents did a great job with that. But I didn't know who he was. And if you don't have that connection, you tend to wander. And those are connections that need to be built when you're a child.
So once you left Colorado Springs, you went to college up in Denver. Is that correct?
Yes, I went to the University of Denver, and I left Colorado Springs actually in 1983 and started a corporate career up in Denver and had great success with that. But I was completely adrift in my faith. I was living the high life from a worldly life. If you knew me, you thought, wow, such great success. I had everything in the eyes of the world, but inside I was a complete mess.
Now, at one point about 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago now, you wrote a book that was very successful and got a lot of publicity. And it was about your dating experiences. I believe it was called, was it Losers, Creeps, Weirdos, and Jerks? I may not have it in the right order.
That's very close.
But first of all, tell us about that book. I know you had like an incredible journey where it just nationwide got a lot of attention, but also when you look back on that now, what do you see?
The book was Losers, Creeps, Jerks, and Weirdos, a dating story. And it was a book about my true life dating stories. And I was actually the #1 morning radio interview in the U.S. and Canada in 2003. And I traveled coast to coast with that book. It was a phenomenal success. When I look back on it now, it's surreal. I was in such a different place. I thought I had it all together, and it was a very fun, I call it my 15 minutes of fame. I thought that was going to be the end of it. I never intended to write a book. It was written on a dare by my best friend, and it just took a life of its own. And everybody has a bad dating story, right? So it was great fun. And inside, once again, I was just part of the many walking wounded. And that's how I see it now. I was just relating to many, many millions of walking wounded.
Is that what you think made the book so popular? Is just that everybody is kind of searching for something, or so many people, I guess I should say, are searching for something and kind of looking maybe in the dating scene, but not really finding what they're looking for? Exactly.
That's exactly right. We are all looking for the same thing. Every one of us is looking for love. We all want to love and be loved. And what we're truly doing at the heart of it, most particularly in our culture today, is we're using one another. Love is missing. Use has replaced love. And that's why when we turn on cable news and we see all the pain in the world and we're shocked by it, really?
In the midst of this, at some point, not too long after the book is published, you found yourself with an unintended pregnancy, correct?
That's correct.
And can you tell us a little bit about what you were going through at that point in your life?
Well, again, I was in a great self-lie. Let me put it that way. No one could lie better to me than me. And I thought I had it all, but I had no center point. I didn't know what love was. I was looking for it, and as I think some song goes, in all the wrong places. So I ended up in this situation, pregnant, alone. The guy wanted nothing to do with it. I felt I had nowhere to turn. I had had a previous experience with my family that had not been very open, so I was not going to go to them. I did not feel I could go to the church because I had had prior bad experiences in going to the church. So I didn't know where to turn. I wanted and needed compassion and understanding and support and help and a way out and someone to walk with me, and not someone to tell me I had done a bad thing in the wrong order. I already knew that. Women who find themselves in this situation are full of fear, shame, guilt, isolation, and they need mercy. They need compassion. And wherever it is that they can find it, that's where they're going to go.
So at that point, then, you were, can you tell us about some of the bad experiences or impressions with the Catholic Church that kind of kept you from turning to the church during that moment of crisis?
Yeah, it starts, I mean, there's little things in my past growing up as a little child, but they stand out. So I'll bring them up because I don't think they are isolated cases. For instance, I remember probably being about 9 years old, maybe 10, young, and going to confession. And the priest yelled at me because he always heard the same thing from me in confession. I didn't really understand it, really didn't know what else to say, so it was pretty much always the same. I've been mean to my brothers and not nice to my parents. And this one day, he got upset with me for that, and I actually never went back.
And then later on in your life, I know you at one point described yourself as spiritual but not religious. And what was your faith life at that point?
Well, again, I didn't really have one, and to be honest, and again, I don't think I'm an isolated case. The church is really the people in the church. So a lot of my experiences weren't necessarily with a priest per se, but it might be someone sitting in the pew that was not nice or open or compassionate. So the church is us. And I think it's important now, especially in retrospect, and I say this for myself most of all, is to always be aware of how I might come across to someone else, because I don't know their situation. That might be their only time walking in back to the church in a very long time. And if I don't present a smiling face and a welcome and an introduction, that might be the one chance.
So, at this point in your life, you're finding yourself pregnant, and as you mentioned, alone, and so you make the decision to terminate the pregnancy, and then at that point you've pretty much decided you were just going to kind of forget all about it, correct?
Well, I need to go back. I think it's important that to mention I did not want to terminate the pregnancy. I have yet to meet any woman that has truly wanted to terminate the pregnancy. I was looking for a way out. The problem was I didn't find the help I needed to find a safe place and a way to do this. So most reluctantly, I bought the lie of the so-called compassion of Planned Parenthood, and I took the information they gave me and went to the only place that I thought that I could go.
And did any of your family members know about this?
I shared it with no one.
And now at this point, you're still quite successful working in the business world, correct?
Absolutely.
And you then wrote another book before Waiting for a Name. After the book about dating, you wrote another book. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I wrote a book titled Lunatides. It was a book about divorce and divorce recovery. Again, it was based on my life and what I had been through. And I don't say a failed marriage because I never recognized it as a marriage, but just a failed wedding.
We're here on Bishop Sheridan Presents. I'm your guest host, Veronica Ambule, and I've been speaking to Cynthia Cerny. She's author of a new book called Waiting for a Name, and we'll be back after the break.
What do the revealed events of Jesus' infancy signify? According to the Catholic Catechism, Jesus' circumcision signals his incorporation into the people of the covenant, Abraham's descendants. The Epiphany portrays Jesus as the Messiah, the Savior of all people. The Magi, arriving from different lands, indicate that the gospel will spread to all peoples, but that they must turn toward the Jews and the messianic message contained in the Old Testament. The presentation in the temple reveals Jesus to be the firstborn son who belongs to the Lord. Simeon's prediction of a sword that will pierce Mary's heart is a prophecy of the oblation of the cross. The flight into Egypt and the slaughter of the innocents displays the opposition of darkness to the light. This is Peggy Stanton, and this has been the Order of Malta's Minute with the Catechism.
Today's episode of Bishop Sheridan Presents is archived at Colorado Catholic Herald online. Just go to www.coloradocatholicherald.com and click on the audio-video link, and you can listen to every episode of Bishop Sheridan Presents.
Welcome back to Bishop Sheridan Presents. I'm your guest host, Veronica Ambule, assistant editor of the Colorado Catholic Herald newspaper today. And we are speaking with Cynthia Cerny. She's the author of a new book called Waiting for a Name. Cynthia, before we go any further, please tell our listeners how they can get a copy of your book.
They can go to the website, waitingforaname.com, and they will be directed there. They can buy it direct through that website or through Amazon.com.
Now, before the break, we were kind of talking about where your life was in the mid 2000s. At 2007, you wrote a book called Luna Tides, and then in 2010, your life kind of had a turning point. Can you tell us about that?
It had a real turning point. It had a Paul knocked on the ground type of moment. It'll be 4 years ago this November. November 19th, 2010, I literally found myself on my deathbed. I had been one day feeling just great, and the next day I had actually blacked out in the shower, was unconscious for 20 minutes, finally got out, fell unconscious again, blacked out. Came to after probably another 10 minutes, crawled to the phone, called my parents, lived alone, asked them to come take me to the hospital. And the moment we got to the hospital, I was rushed into the emergency room. They did brain scans. I had a 105 plus temperature for 5 straight days that they could not get under control and break. It should have actually fried my brain. My body organs, one by one, started shutting down. Near the end, I was completely paralyzed. And that Friday morning, it was 4 a.m., I knew in a most unbelievable way, hard to explain, but I had full knowledge that I would be dead within just a couple hours. And I just had an overwhelming urge to pray. And the problem was I didn't know how to pray, because at that point I had been away from the church for about 20 years. And here I am, I'm thinking I'm a best-selling author, and never in my wildest dreams did I think that my final moments that I wouldn't have something absolutely profound to share with the world. And I couldn't even formulate a thought. It was most surreal. So in those final moments, as I was just grasping for any prayer that I could think of, and knowing from my earliest childhood days that a good Catholic had a prayer for everything, the first thought that came to mind was the Hail Mary. And immediately after I had that thought, there was a voice that I heard that told me that wasn't the prayer. That wasn't a dying person's prayer. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. In hindsight, I believe that that was the voice of the enemy. And I dismissed that prayer, and I was hoping for something else. And soon after, the angel of God came to mind. And the moment that thought entered my mind, that prayer entered my mind, that same voice came back and said, that's not the prayer for you either. You're dying, you need a dying person's prayer. And this was all so real as I'm sitting here with you today. And I was very scared. So I cried out to God for mercy and begged his forgiveness for every rotten thing I had ever done in my life. And there was a lot of that. And for every single person I had ever hurt or harmed. And after crying out to him and begging his forgiveness, the thought of the Our Father came to mind. And immediately I knew that was the prayer. And so I prayed it silent. And when I say I'm praying this, it was all internal. I couldn't speak at this point. So this was all going on in my heart. And I prayed it, the prayer. And after I prayed it, I asked for God's forgiveness again. I begged Jesus to come and to come quick. I prayed it a second time, again asked for forgiveness. I asked the Lord to come, take me quick. I asked him to hug me. I was afraid. I wanted to be with him. I was empty, completely empty. And I just wanted him to know how sorry I was and I only wanted to be with him. I prayed it a third time. And at the end of the third time of prayer, I just drifted off. And I have no other recollection until it shone 7:11 on the clock, and my body just jerked. And I knew I would not die. Although physically, I actually ended up getting worse. At 12 noon that day, though, that Friday, the fever broke.
Now, up till this point, the doctors had absolutely no idea what was wrong with you, correct?
That's correct. They had brought in a team of rare disease specialists. Actually, I had a whole slew of doctors on the case. They thought it was perhaps some rare blood infection. I had been isolated. I was tested for something like 72 very rare diseases, things that you would find in the jungles. And to this day, the case is marked unknown in the medical charts.
So once your fever finally did break, though, it was still a long recovery period after that, wasn't it?
It was. I actually begged to be released from the hospital. The hospital did not want to release me for obvious reasons. I was actually down to 83 pounds. My parents ended up having to sign a bunch of legal documents to take responsibility for me, and I was signed over and released to my parents with everyone believing that I would just go home and die there, because the moment I left that hospital, my condition worsened. But I knew I would not die. My parents moved in with me. God bless them. They put their entire lives on hold and took care of me until I could finally take care of myself once again. And the date of that was January 1st, 2011. And the very first thing I did was drive to the nearest Catholic church, which was Pax Christi.
And you had a very unusual experience there as well, didn't you?
Yes, I arrived that morning just after 5 a.m. I wanted to make sure that I secured the back pew, and just in case I wanted to leave if I got uncomfortable. It had been so long since I had willingly gone to church, and I wanted to not be seen. So I arrived, I drove around the parking lot. Of course, there was not another car in sight, and I was only praying that the doors would be unlocked. So I parked the car, walked to the entrance. The doors were unlocked. I was surprised, but happily so. And the doors that I entered through at that church, if I were to have turned to the right, it would have led to the church offices, and going to the left, it took me straight into the sanctuary. And as I turned to the left and looked ahead, I saw a priest, and down, just standing in the entry to the sanctuary. And I thought to myself, that was quite unusual and strange. Number one, it was hours before Mass, and no priest comes that early to church, and there was no sign of anybody being in the parking lot.
And it was also New Year's Day, right?
Yes. Now, again, for me, that didn't equate to me that it was a feast day. I only knew it was Sunday. I was a child, in a preschooler in my knowledge of my faith at that time. So the only thing that registered was it was Sunday. I had not been to Mass, as I said, willingly, in too many Sundays. And I just had to go. I knew that. I wanted to go. Not that I had to go. I wanted to be there. I wanted to be there. So as I was walking down the corridor and seeing the priest ahead, and I was just so drawn to him and confused as to why he would be there. And as I got closer to him, probably I'd say 10 to 12 feet away, he opened his arms and I knew, and he hugged me, and I just burst into tears and fell into his arms because I knew those were actually the holy arms, the arms that I had prayed for in the hospital for Jesus to actually come and give me my hug. I received my hug that day in divine mercy, and it was the most powerful moment that there are no words. It was a powerful, awesome moment with my Lord and Savior.
So that was combined with your sickness, that was kind of your journey back to the start, I should say, of your journey back to the Catholic Church then, correct?
Yes, it was my life's conversion. It was a whole fresh start. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that, number one, I had to turn my life around. I had to make some changes. And number two, and most importantly, I knew that I would be met with mercy in God's church. I knew mercy was waiting for me.
I believe you wrote that it was not too long after that you went on a Rachel's Vineyard retreat. Is that correct?
Yes, I had two major things that needed to be repaired in my life. The first one was an annulment for the wedding that I had back in 1982. And so I filed for that annulment on February 14th of 2011, and most appropriately, my case number was 911. And then after I filed that, I saw an ad in a church bulletin for a Rachel's Vineyard retreat. I had known nothing about Rachel's Vineyard up until that time, except what was in that very small church bulletin ad, which said, if you are suffering from a past abortion, there is hope and healing. And I called the number and I went to the retreat, which was that first weekend of March 2011.
We've been speaking with Cynthia Cerny. She's the author of a book titled Waiting for a Name. And after the break, she's going to tell us about her experience on that Rachel's Vineyard retreat.
This is Dale Ahlquist with a Chesterton Minute. G.K. Chesterton says, "You are free in our time to say that God does not exist. You are free to say that he exists and is evil. You are free to say that he would like to exist if he could. You may talk of God as a metaphor or a mystification. You may water him down with gallons of long words or boil him to rags of metaphysics. And it is not merely that nobody punishes, but nobody protests. But if you speak of God as a fact, as a thing like a tiger, as a reason for changing one's conduct, then the modern world will stop you somehow if it can. We are long past talking about whether an unbeliever should be punished for being irreverent. It is now thought irreverent to be a believer. Want more than a minute? Visit our website, chesterton.org.
Today's episode of Bishop Sheridan Presents is archived at Colorado Catholic Herald online. Just go to www.coloradocatholicherald.com and click on the audio-video link, and you can listen to every episode of Bishop Sheridan Presents.
Welcome back to Bishop Sheridan Presents. I'm your guest host, Veronica Ambuel, and we've been speaking with Cynthia Cerny. She's the author of a new book titled Waiting for a Name, which has been endorsed by a number of people, including Archbishop Aquila in Denver, and then Father Paul Wicker, the pastor of Holy Apostles, and I believe also one of the Capuchin priests at the Citadel also endorsed your book. Is that correct?
Yes, Father Dean has been a great supporter of the book all the way along.
Great. And tell us again where you can buy the book.
You can get on Amazon.com or the website for the book, waitingforaname.com.
Great. Now, before the break, we were talking about the fact that you had reached a point where you were coming back to church and you had seen an ad in the bulletin for a Rachel's Vineyard retreat, and you signed up for that. And first of all, we want to tell our listeners, for anyone who's not aware that Rachel's Vineyard is a ministry for post-abortive men and women that involves a weekend retreat. And now, initially, though, you weren't too excited about going on this retreat, were you, Cynthia?
No, excited would not be the word. I was angry, to be completely transparent. It was difficult. This was a choice that I had made, regretfully, a choice, again, I never wanted to make. Never, ever wanted to make. I felt boxed at the time, and so many women that I have met and spoken with have found themselves in similar situations. It's tragic. It's just simply tragic. But I knew I needed to deal with it. It was a secret that I had kept from everyone. The only one that knew about it was the father of the child, and he abandoned all responsibility and fled. Has never claimed it to this day, unfortunately. But I too buried it, because it is such a heart pain that truly the only way to reconcile it is to bury it. There's no other way. So at this point, with the miraculous recovery I had had and the great mercy shown to me, it was time to unbury that secret and deal with it and name it. I had to name it. So I saw the ad in the bulletin, and to all pastors out there, to all priests out there, it's so important. You don't know when someone's going to walk into your church and just grab a bulletin and leave, and it's important, because no one wants to be seen. See, that's the thing. How do you even advertise this help? Nobody wants to be seen in a bathroom or standing at a bulletin board and reading something for help for post-abortive women, and men. But if it's in a bulletin, then you can take that, because everybody in the church reads the bulletin. So I just want to put that out there. So I made the call. And as I was dialing the phone, just praying that the phone would be answered, because in truth, I knew if I didn't get a live voice, I wouldn't try again. It takes tremendous courage, Veronica, for a man or a woman to dial that phone. I can't even tell you. Some of the bravest men and women that I have met are these men and women that have reached out for healing from abortion. So I went with a horrible attitude. As you mentioned, the Rachel's Vineyard program is a 3-day intensive retreat. It starts on a Friday evening, generally around 5, and goes through Sunday afternoon about 3. I knew that if I didn't take off work that Friday, I would find some reason, some excuse not to show up. So I took the day off from work. I used the excuse to all my friends and family that I was going to take a spa weekend up in the mountains. I drove to the site where the retreat was being held, and I parked my vehicle facing the front doors to the facility so that I could look for all the ugly people that would be entering that door, not realizing that ugly had arrived and was sitting in the parking lot. And I literally sat there all day long, except for 2 bathroom breaks. And God, as he has such great humor, showed to me there were only 2 people that entered those front doors that day. One was the mail carrier, and the other was a coffee vendor, until 5 o'clock when Ugly got out of her car and entered the building.
And so that retreat, though, you did really find that it was very healing. I mean, despite the fact that it in a sense is quote unquote only 3 days, but you did feel that in those 3 days that you in a sense, we're transformed through the process of, as you mentioned, naming the child and so forth.
It's really funny, Veronica, because yes, I'm going into it saying this is not going to help me. This is not going to heal me. This is, I had such anger. And total pessimistic outlook. I was taking all my frustration out on everybody. I carried in all my heavy baggage. And not even for a moment considering that in God all things are possible. And I didn't have the background. I didn't have the knowledge at that time. But in hindsight, oh my goodness, Cynthia, are you kidding me? Look what God did in 3 days from Good Friday to Easter Sunday. To think he could not heal me, he healed me. He gave me a whole new life. He gave me peace. My daughter, Elizabeth Ann, received her name. She received acknowledgement, and I have received peace. And I cannot wait. I know I will see her someday. And I think it's ironic. So many people have no problem thinking, I hope I can see my cat again in heaven. I hope I hope my dog will be there. Do we ever think in this country of the 56 to 57 million aborted children that are in heaven waiting for their name? They will be there. That's a fact.
That obviously then became or led to you titling your book, Waiting for a Name. But there was also a really interesting story just behind the writing of that book as well, right? Because I know you told me that initially, even though you went on the Rachel's Vineyard retreat, you never intended to really go public about your abortion. Is that true?
Absolutely true. My whole life, really, in a weird way, has been built around secrets. My career was as a secretary. Secretary means secret keeper. I'm the best at keeping secrets. When I left that Rachel's Vineyard retreat that Sunday afternoon, I spoke to the priest again. I wanted his assurance that I never had to speak about this ever again. And he assured me, no, this was between me and God, and I was forgiven. I knew I was healed. I knew it. I must say, it was the most spectacular 3 days of my entire life. And for any man or woman listening to us right now, I highly encourage you to attend. There is a new life for you. So I left there knowing I didn't have to share it, was not going to share it. I made a promise to myself. I'm good. I'm golden. I'm done. I will never, ever speak of this again. Ever. Just as when I finished writing Luna Tides, after I'd written that book, I told everyone I will never, ever, 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 ever write another book again. Ever. Never say never.
Yeah, so what happened to all of a sudden then get you start writing again?
Well, after my conversion from the hospital, I started using strange language for me. I was constantly saying, I'm thirsty. And it was to the point that people that knew me thought I actually had some dehydration problem as some remnant from my illness. But what it was I had this amazing thirsting to know God. As you asked a long time ago, for that relationship, I wanted a relationship with him. I wanted it. I didn't have to have it. I wanted it. There's a huge difference. And so I started reading everything I could get my hands on. And I cannot stress enough, Veronica, where I was in my knowledge of God was Zippo. I mean, I thought Jeremiah was a bullfrog. I didn't know that Jeremiah was a prophet. I had to look it up. What was so weird is the name Jeremiah kept coming to me, and I didn't know why, because truly all I knew was there was a song, and I knew the song. I could sing the song. I still can sing the song. I love the song. So I had to look that up, but I was immersing myself in everything that I could get my hands on. And it did not take me many months to realize that, in fact, the Holy Spirit himself was teaching me my catechesis, because books would come, someone might mention a book, weird things that would happen, strange things, unexplainable things, how I would just be led from book to book to book. And to this day, I just wish I had written them down in the order that I had read them, because, again, I was so, I would claim almost anything but Catholic during my spiritual phase. Call me anything but Catholic was kind of my motto. So I started reading Protestant books written by Protestant authors. And I remember very clearly the very first book that I read by a Catholic was actually read by one of the archbishops. And I was so angry. And I remember telling my mom, I don't want to read this book. I don't want to read this book. And she's like, why? And I said, it's written by a priest or an archbishop. I don't want to read it. But that's where all my reading led. It led me back to the Catholic Church.
So at that point, then, you start to have a strong feeling that you need to share your experiences with others to help them, especially those who might also be post-abortive, and just help others in their journey. So after the break, we're going to talk about how you wrote Waiting for a Name. Again, I'm your guest host, Veronica Ambule, assistant editor of the Colorado Catholic Herald, and we've been speaking with Cynthia Cerny. We'll be back after the break.
Daily Meditations of Pope Benedict XVI, presented by Leonardo D. Philippus of St. Luke Productions.
Eternal life. Eternal life is not simply what comes afterward, something about which we can form no notion at all. Because it is a new quality of existence, it can be already present in the midst of this earthly life. But the dividing line between eternal and temporal life is by no means simply of a chronological order, so that the years before death would be temporal life. The endless time afterward would be eternal life, as we generally think. But because eternity is not just endless time, but another level of being, such a merely chronological distinction cannot be right. Eternal life is there in the midst of time, wherever we come face to face with God. Through the contemplation of the living God, it can become something like the firm base of our soul. Like a great love, it can no longer be taken from us by any change or chance. Rather, it is an indestructible heart from which spring the courage and the joy to go on, even when exterior things are painful and hard. When God touches his soul, man learns to see aright. This is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent, says the Lord. Wherever such an encounter takes place, there is eternal life. The dividing line between temporal life and eternal life runs right through the midst of our temporal life.
This meditation is taken from Benedictus, published by Ignatius Press and Magnificat, and produced by St. Luke Productions. Learn more at stlukeproductions.com.
Today's episode of Bishop Sheridan Presents is archived at Colorado Catholic Herald online. Just go to www.coloradocatholicherald.com and click on the audio-video link, and you can listen to every episode of Bishop Sheridan Presents.
We're back with Bishop Sheridan Presents. I'm your guest host, Veronica Ambule, and we've been speaking with Cynthia Cerny. She's the author of a new book titled Waiting for a Name. And before the break, she was talking to us about how she had gone on a Rachel's Vineyard retreat for post-abortive men and women. And now this is about 2012, right, Cynthia?
Yes.
You're starting to feel like maybe God is asking you to write about your experiences to possibly help others who are in a similar position. So tell us just how this book came about.
Well, I was sitting in the back pew of church one day. I like the back pew. And I heard the title of the book. It was audible. And once again, it was very early. It was a little after 5 a.m. So there's a theme here, back pew of a church, 5 a.m., and things happen. So for those of you who haven't been to church for a while, I recommend the back pew at 5 a.m. But seriously, I heard the name, and I knew instantly it was a book title. I knew what it was about. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. You told me I didn't have to ever speak about it again. But I was fascinated by the title. I still am. It actually has layers of meaning. The most obvious for the post-abortive man or woman is their child is waiting for their name. But there's another layer, and that is in all biblical accounts, when a person had a conversion, they received a new name. So it's just layers and layers. It's a beautiful title. And it's the book I didn't want to write. But every day of that week, sitting in the back row, I heard the name. And then I left for vacation. And the moment that plane had just the nose off the runway, the words started coming. And that book, I literally hand wrote on little tiny notepads on my entire vacation, plus the next 6 to 8 weeks after. It just came flooding out of me. And it was to the point where it would happen at the most inconvenient times and inconvenient places. But I learned quite quickly that whatever I was doing, the words took precedence. And so I would pull over off the interstate and write it down, or many times in the middle of Mass or at a family dinner or a social business gathering, I would be reaching for my purse and writing the words.
But at that point, then, the book wasn't really anywhere near its final form, right? There was an interesting story behind that as well.
The book, I mean, obviously I knew how to write a book because I had done it successfully twice before. This book was like no other book that I have ever written. Therefore, I'm quite comfortable to say I did not write it. It came to me. I wrote the words down. I wrote what I heard. The book was literally on little tiny notepads. Nothing was dated. Nothing was in order. I had stacks of these notepads. And once I felt that I had everything I was going to receive, I felt very pressed in my spirit to take these notepads and type them up. So that's what I did. And I had literally pages and pages and pages of single-spaced copy of one big chapter. So I had to figure out, what am I going to do with this? And I didn't know what to do with this because this was all such a new experience to me. So I thought, my dad's a speed reader, so I'll just take it to my father, and I will ask him to just read through it and put a little slash line every place that it might fit to make for a chapter. So that's what I did, and that truly was my expectation. And when I delivered it to my father and gave him instructions to do just that, and I gave him a time period of 1 day to do all that in, and came back to collect my completed book, he just was sitting there with just this blank stare on his face, asking me, Cynthia, what is this? And I said, Dad, it's a book. Dad, have you marked the chapter pages? And he goes, this is a mess. You have so many things going on in this book. He had tried to map some themes for me, because it is not a book about abortion, and that is very important to state. This is a book about life. It's the whole of life. It speaks about dating, marriage, time, work, and death. It is not a book about abortion, although it addresses abortion. It speaks to the truth of life and the whole of life. So after my dad had worked on it, and I didn't speak to him for about 6 weeks after, because I actually felt he mutilated my work. But I took it back. I again was very heavy on my spirit. I knew I had to get this done, and now I was really at my wit's end, because I felt my father had made it worse by trying to help me make sense of it. So after a lot of prayer, I finally felt called to bring it to God. And what does that mean? Well, bring it to adoration. So that's what I did. One night, Friday night after work, because I'm such a simpleton, but well, I better pack my suitcase, because I'm going to be hanging out in adoration all weekend, because I am not leaving until God fixes this book. It's his work. I know this, so he's going to have to fix it. So I literally packed a little duffel bag. I went to the Adoration Chapel. And what was most extraordinary that evening, and I've been to the Adoration Chapel for many times over the previous about 3 years at that point. And there would always be people in the Adoration Chapel, but it was never been full, and certainly never full of children. And the night I took the work to God, the Adoration Chapel was full of children. And there was only one seat available, and it was a seat directly in front of Christ. So that's where I took it. I laid out all of my papers, and I said, Jesus, I'm not leaving here until you fix this. And the next thing I know, and I can't explain it, but my hands started moving, and I started coding things and moving things around. And when I left the Adoration Chapel and got to my car, I looked at the clock, and I had been in there exactly 1 hour. And it took me 18 hours to make all the changes.
So what you thought was going to take an entire weekend actually was accomplished in an hour once you took it to the Blessed Sacrament, huh?
Yes. So my joke is that 1 God hour equals 18 human hours, because that's how long it took me to fix it. And that is the book, Waiting for a Name.
Now, this book came out just within the last couple months, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Tell us a little bit about some of the response you've gotten from people.
The response has been humbling, to say the least. I don't think I've met that many people who I have witnessed crying. It is bringing peace and hope from all different walks of life, ages, groups. I mean, this speaks to all people. It meets people where they are. If I lined up 50 people right now in this room and I asked them to tell me what this book was about, I assure you, you're going to hear 50 different answers, because it speaks to people in a most personal way. Someone might say, my work life is out of balance. I've put my family on a back burner. I've got to straighten that out. Someone else who's wounded by abortion is certainly going to see that the hope there is for them in this.
And you mentioned that there have been, I believe you said that the some of the Capuchin fathers at the Citadel Mall, where they hear confessions, quite a bit there, that it has caused a couple people who were post-abortive themselves to come forward. And can you just talk a little bit about, we've touched on it already, but what would you say to someone out there who is has, in a sense, just kind of maybe put their faith life on hold because, but they know that they need to go through this healing process as well.
I would say run, don't walk to God's open arms. Run into his open arms. There is nothing that anyone out there listening today has done that is not forgivable. And anything, if someone has stolen a large amount of money, if someone has committed any sort of crime, if anyone is participated in abortion, it's all forgivable. And God wants to end the mutual suffering. There's forgiveness for you. There is a new life for you. There is hope for you. The church is a church of mercy, and we could not have a better Pope for our time. Pope Francis has actually spoken in support of the Rachel's Vineyard program. He knows of it through his work in Argentina. Rachel's Vineyards in 85 countries and 48 states. So there's hope for everyone. No matter where you are today, you don't have to be in that same place tomorrow. And in the Catholic Church, we have the great sacrament of reconciliation. And it is not the priest you are meeting there. It is the priest you are meeting there. It is Christ himself.
And I believe that if anyone is interested in finding a Rachel's Vineyard retreat near them, the website to go to is rachelsvineyard.org, correct?
That's correct, rachelsvineyard.org.
Cynthia, we don't have too much time left, but in our remaining couple minutes here, can you tell us where would you like to see the pro-life movement going forward kind of place their emphasis, or is there any advice you have for people who are involved in the pro-life movement?
The greatest thing that I would like to see right now is actually a change of name. Pro-life, what is that? We need to start calling things what they are. It is a child. It should be pro-child movement. Pro-child movement. And for those that think, well, that only pertains to a certain time in life. No, it actually embraces the mother, the father, and the baby. We are all children of God. God is pro-child. We are all his children. Let's start really dealing with truthful words. I think our culture is in a very bad place with the disintegration of language. We also need to start doing a better job, with promoting the compassion. Truth is on our side. It's just that the pro-choice movement has done better spinning the lies than we have done in delivering the truth. We must show more compassion for those mothers and fathers. I would like to see more speaking from the pulpit for compassion for those mothers and fathers, because no matter if the child has been in the womb for even a minute, that woman is forever a mother. And we spend a lot of time on the child, rightly so, but we need to extend that out to compassion for those men and women.
Well, unfortunately, we need to wrap up the show there. But again, we've been speaking with Cynthia Cerny. She's the author of a new book titled Waiting for a Name. And that book is available on Amazon.com and also at waitingforaname.com. I'm your guest host, Veronica Ambuel, assistant editor of the Colorado Catholic Herald. And you've been listening to Bishop Sheridan Presents.
We hope you've enjoyed listening to Bishop Sheridan Presents on the Catholic Radio Network.